Alrighty, welcome back. We're looking at express terms this week. Now, so you know, I'm actually recording this one. I'm in week 7 because contracts is really massive. We've got express terms here. We looked at implied terms as well, but I haven't even seen the lecture for that yet, just because there's so much content I have to get through. Week 6 we look at construction of terms, which hopefully I'll make that video soon. In week 7, that's the one I'm in, but I haven't looked at the content yet. So I'm a bit behind. Hopefully I can catch up on that soon. And for some reason our uni break is really late, so I'm not able to catch up during that. Anyway, looking at express terms, and it's sort of exactly what you're thinking it is. It's any term in a contract which is made explicit within the contract. So not all statements are terms. So, for example, basically it's things that are promissory in nature. So using a trusty roll of tape, I say to you, this here is brown sticky tape that will stick things together, right? Bang, that's an express term right there. Not all statements are express terms, so we're looking at, what's it called, representations, mere representations. Now, the primary difference, that's right, so in a contract there's, like in laws, there's normally a definition section or interpretation guidelines or whatever. So in a contract that's also not an express term. One thing that we were looking at is the representation. So representation is a statement about the product that's non-promissory. The test includes, so the test of whether something is, so for example, I could say, this here is the most wondrous piece of sticky tape in the whole entire world, guaranteed to make anything stick to anything else, right? If I say something crazy like that, then we need to decide whether it's a representation or an express term, and to do that we use the 5 following statements, the 5 following criteria. So the first is the statement's importance. So how important is the statement for you to buy this tape? Time elapsed between the statement and the agreement, so the longer time has a higher likelihood of it being a representation. So for example, if I say to you, this piece of sticky tape is guaranteed to, be able to tape 2 bits of fabric together, right? And then in 6 months you buy the tape, well, chances are that statement is going to be more likely to be a representation because you're not buying the product in reliance of that particular statement, or there's less likelihood of you doing that. Whether the stating party was more qualified than the other party. So if I'm about to sell you this piece of sticky tape and it turns out that you've been in the sticky tape game for just ever, and then I make a statement, and then you look at this and you can form your own judgments about this, then chances are that my statement is not going to hold as much importance as your own belief as a tape expert. This usually happens when we're looking at cars, right? It's just so you know. So like if a qualified mechanic who's been in the game for 20 years is told something by a salesman who's been on the job for 10 days, then the mechanics, then chances are that if the salesman gets something wrong, then it doesn't matter because the mechanics are more aware of what's going on. And whether it was included or omitted in the final contract. Yeah, that's right. So like if we're negotiating the price for this tape, and then right at the start I go, this is the most wondrous piece of tape, guaranteed to stick any 2 bits of fabric together. And then we get to the final contract and then we draft it up and then I omit that fact, then chances are that's just going to be a representation. These are court matters, like courts have to decide these. There's no really hard and fast rule, it's sort of a case by case instance. Oscar Chess and Williams, if a party relied upon their best information it was false, the false assumption can't be sued upon. So this is a case, I believe one of these companies, we'll say Oscar Chess was a car company, and Williams had a car, I forget the details, let's say it's a 1952 Chevy or something like that, right? He trades in his car and gets £200 or whatever it is. Oscar Chess is like, yep, that's great. Oscar Chess though go and then go through their system, whatever, and they then discover that the product was actually a 1941 Chevy, right? Oh my goodness, so Williams had given false information to Oscar Chess, but it turned out that Williams's papers were false. So Williams thought he had a 1952 car, so when he said, hey, I've got a 1952 car, he was just acting with the best information he had. And seeing as though Oscar Chess were the car manufacturing company and they had the better resources to determine this for themselves, it was found that Oscar Chess couldn't sue Williams because Williams was just acting with the information that he had. Dick Bentley Productions versus Harold Smith Motors. If a party lied but should have known better, the false information can be sued upon. That's right. So let's go back to our Oscar Chess v. Williams example. It's pretty much the same story. If Williams had known that his car was a 1941 model, and like he had the papers and he was a qualified mechanic and all that kind of stuff, and then traded in and lied, saying, "Hey, it's actually a 1952 model," then Oscar Chess would be able to sue Williams for that information. Does that? I hope that kind of makes sense. So yeah, basically, if I was acting to the best of my knowledge, then you can't sue me for false information. If I lied, then you can. That's the general rule. Intention is measured objectively. Proof of intention to contract and proof that promissory parties' knowledge was relied upon to be seen. What does this mean? Circumstances of contact can be seen. Specific words that strictly matter. But no inference can be drawn against the expressed. That's right. Okay, so. When we're looking at express terms and the way that these terms are made and included in the contract, we need to see intention that both parties had promissory intent and the intent to create legal relations. So that's if you're suing or trying to enforce an express term, you need to prove these things. Yeah, when you're determining this, you can use evidence from anywhere. Unless your evidence is going contrary to an express term. And we'll look at the parole evidence rule in a sec. That's kind of what this paragraph relates to. The signature rule from Lestrange v. Graucombe, or however you pronounce that, is when you sign a contract, all the terms apply to you, even if you haven't read it. So you can't really say, "Oh, I didn't know that was in the contract." Well, the reality is you did. You signed it. Well, you didn't have to know because you signed it, right? So either you read and understand the terms, or you agree to risk not understanding the terms. Unless in the contract there's a misrepresentation, there's duress, there's mistake, there's false writing elements. What's reasonable notice? No, you don't need reasonable notice in this instance. That's actually false. So reasonable notice, we sort of looked at that. Where did we look at that? Oh, tickets. Yeah, that's same. So this all happened so long ago. I'm blurring information. Yeah. So due notice is basically when you get told the terms before you sign the contract. That's basically what that means. And you don't really have to prove that with the signature rule. But yeah, all these are vitiating factors, which we'll look at later in the term. And these can waive the signature rule, but other than that, generally speaking, if you sign a contract, it's in force. Documents relating to contract when signed made a part of the contract. That's fairly straightforward. If we sign a contract that you will buy this piece of tape, and then we sign a separate contract saying, "Hey, you're going to buy the tape at my place at 6:30," then that becomes part of the main contract. Yeah, Curtis v. Chemical Cleaning and Dyeing Co. Orally misrepresented terms can outweigh the signature rule. Furthermore, receipts, vouchers, etc. cannot be contracts unless specific attention is drawn to them. So the story in this situation, Curtis had a dress. I believe Curtis was a guy buying it for his wife. Took it to a dry cleaning company, and the dry cleaning company gave him a receipt and said, "Hey, I need you to sign this receipt." Right on the receipt, there were terms. Curtis said something like, "Hey, just to make sure," he asked about an explicit term. I can't remember what it was. Something like, "Hey, if it's damaged, will you replace it? The guy on the other end said, "Yep, sure." And so then Curtis signed the contract, signed the receipt, gave it back. Then they damaged the address, and then Curtis sued under the proviso that it was an oral misrepresentation. Because part of the contract was waiving liability, and so Chemical Cleaning Co.'s sitting there going, "Yep, well, he signed, we waived liability," and the courts are saying, "Well, no, you said that's not the case." So that's where that comes from. Furthermore, receipts, vouchers, etc. cannot be contracts unless specific attention is drawn to them. That's right. So he was given a receipt, right? Receipt of purchase. That is not a contract. Neither is a voucher. Neither is any of that sort of stuff. That can't be a contract because on its face it doesn't look like a contract. It looks like something else. If you do want it to be a contract though, then you have to say to the customer, "Hey, just so you know, when you sign this, you're agreeing to X, Y, and Z terms." Like there has to be specific attention drawn to them, otherwise it's not enforceable. Yeah, that's what that means. Notice isn't required for signed contracts. For unsigned contracts, it is and must be given beforehand. Yep. So the case that we looked at, I can't remember if it's this case or not, but this couple booked a hotel, and then when they got to the hotel, they found that there was a big term saying, the hotel is not responsible for liability for lost objects. And so the couple were like, okay, whatever, we're going to chill. The stuff gets stolen. They then sue the hotel. The hotel's like, well, no, we had an express term up on the wall. They should have seen it. And the court said, well, you didn't give that to them when they booked the hotel, so it can't really be enforced. So that's basically saying that if I want you to agree to something, we can't make an agreement and then I say, oh yeah, and this means that you're agreeing to this. So I have to tell you what you're agreeing to before we get into the contract. Tickets with terms on them, yeah. So when you go to, I'll summarize this quickly and easily. When you go to a parking lot, if a human is selling you the ticket and the ticket has terms on it, then the terms are binding under the assumption that you can just return the ticket. If it's a machine, then any terms on the ticket are not enforced because you bought the ticket after, you read the terms after you bought the ticket, so they can't be enforced. If you do want them to be enforced, excuse me, then there must be on signage that is clear, structured, and given with a reasonable opportunity to accept or reject them, right? So, trying to think of how I can give an example. Let's say here is the machine, right? You are the car going here. The term should be kind of right here, right? And unobstructed, maybe more like that, unobstructed and unseen and clear. So you know exactly what you're getting into when you're in that scenario. Documents that appear contractual don't need special attention drawn to them. Yeah, I already said this. Documents that don't, they do. Yeah, that's what I was saying before up here. So if it's like a receipt or a voucher, that's not contracting unless there's specific attention drawn to it. Prior dealings can create express terms, assuming that there is a reasonable amount of dealings, like a pattern of dealings, and there is nothing revoking the prior terms. So what this means, like, if you and I make a whole lot of transactions, like if I'm selling you a whole lot of pieces of sticky tape, let's say I sell you 10 in 1 month, right? So you're buying one every 3 days, right? We can create a whole bunch of terms, maybe for the first instance, and then copy those for the second instance and the third instance. But then after that, it's kind of established that this is what we do. Let's say we don't really bother with signing anymore. You just give me the $10 and I give you a tape. We just do that over and over again. The terms that we agreed to way back at the start, make sure I'm in shot, way back at the start are still enforced to the contract that we have now under the prior dealings idea. Yeah. The parole evidence rule is the idea that once we've got a signed contract, an entire complete written contract, then no extrinsic evidence can add to, subtract from, or qualify the pre-existing terms. This means that evidence of prior negotiation, circumstances, or anything else can't be used to judge a contract. It's exactly what it says it is. This doesn't apply to oral contracts or partially written contracts, right? So if half of our contract was me being like, yeah, well, I'll sell you some brown sticky tape that'll, be able to stick 2 pieces of paper together, and then we write down the exact terms, then because half of it's oral and half of it's written, the parole evidence rule doesn't really apply. But if all of the characteristics of this are written down, then all of the characteristics of what you're going to do in exchange for my tape are written down, and then we both sign, then nothing can add to or subtract from that. You must prove first that there was intention for that to be the complete contract. So we'll look at exceptions, and that'll kind of outline this section more thoroughly. If an agreement starts as oral, so I go, yeah, I'll sell you this brown tape for $10, and then you go, yeah, sure, let's see, whatever. And then we decide to write it down. The written contract will supersede. Evidence for implied terms isn't excluded unless the contract specifically says so. Yep. So we look at implied terms next week, but I'll copy this over, and that'll be the first thing that we look at in the next video. Exceptions to the parole evidence rule include proof that the contract only takes effect after a certain event, proof that the contract incorrectly recorded in an oral argument, or proof of a collateral contract. So Proof that it takes place after an event. So if we agree that I will sell you the tape only on the next day that it's raining, and then we agree that face to face, and then this is not a good example. Let me think of a better way of putting this. Yeah, so if we agree that we will make this arrangement on, let's say, the 15th of September, which is 1 week away, then we sign the contract and all that kind of stuff, then that statement that we made can be, it can create an extra term, I think. I think that's how it works, but I'm not sure. Proof that the contract incorrectly recorded an oral agreement. That's right. So if we made an oral agreement and then we wrote it down and then we got something wrong, then that can be used as evidence to enforce something else or interpret a certain term a certain way. Or proof of a collateral contract. A collateral contract is a contract which is made alongside the main contract. And they're not exactly exceptions to the parole evidence rule, because really you're enforcing a separate contract, not the main contract. But the way that this works is, if I sell you this piece of tape, and I promise you that it's going to last 10 years, right? You hear this, and in reliance of my promise, you buy the sticky tape. Then the new contract is formed in which your consideration, remember that consideration is a thing of value, your consideration is agreeing to sign the contract, my consideration is the promise that it's going to last. So once we do that, then that kind of creates an initial contract, which then creates the ability to access the larger contract. So it's kind of like a small contract that's agreed to make a bigger contract. That's a collateral contract. And those terms are enforceable. Yeah, so collateral contracts, to be in effect, they must be promissory in nature. They must not be inconsistent with the main contract, and the acceptor making the main contract, the acceptor makes the main contract in reliance of the promise. So that's pretty much what I said. I promise you that this will last 10 years. There's no inconsistency, so like in the contract, I'm not saying it'll only last 5 or 15 or whatever. And you decide to buy this in reliance on the fact that we are going to do the bigger contract. Under the CISG, the Convention on the International Sale of Goods, there is no parole evidence rule. It's been rebutted many times. That's it. Thank you for watching.